Hello, my name is Malin Öhlund. I'm a veterinarian. I have been specializing on the disease diabetes in cats, and I will tell you more about this disease and about my research here today. I wrote a PhD thesis on the topic, feline diabetes. Half of this thesis was done in collaboration with the Agria Pet Insurance and the Swedish Kennel Club Research Foundation, and this part of my thesis I will tell you more about here today. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we decided to do research on diabetes in cats and why we believe this to be so important. If we start looking at the cat itself, you may already know that the cat is in fact the most popular pet in the whole wide world. And the cat has lived by our side for thousands of years, and they have mainly served as predators for small rodents in older times. But most modern cat breeds, however, they were bred at a much later time point. In the wild, the cat is an efficient hunter, and the cat basically only eats meat, mainly mice and other small rodents. The cat does not have a dietary need to eat carbohydrates at all. And you all know that there is plenty of carbohydrates in feedstuffs such as grains, bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, and so on. And the cat is different here from the dog. There are studies showing that the dog has evolved genetically to be able to eat more carbohydrates because it probably has been given carbohydrate-rich food living by our side during millennia. This adaptation has not been found in the cat's genome, so the cat did not evolve its genes to be able to better process carbs. The cats still have the same carnivorous genes they had when they started to be domesticated thousands of years ago. If we then have a look at our domestic cat, or the house cat, here in Sweden, approximately half of all cats live strictly indoors, and therefore they don't hunt for food, so they get their food served by their servants, that is the owners. And most commonly cats are fed a commercial diet, often bought from the supermarket, and dry food is a common food source. But dry food typically contain quite a bit of carbs, and I will get back to this later on. So we wanted to investigate was how the cat's sedentary lifestyle would affect its health. We all know that an indoor cat, they spend quite a lot of time chilling or sleeping. To be honest, most of them are fairly inactive, especially since most of them also are neutered. And most of our cats will get their food served daily, and as we addressed earlier, the commercial dry food is maybe not nutritionally very much like the cat's natural diet. So we were wondering, how are our cats affected by this Western lifestyle that we offer them? Do we see similarities between cats and ourselves, and how are we humans affected by our Western lifestyle? Well, unfortunately, we already know that humans are quite negatively affected by the abundance of food and the lack of physical exercise that most of us have. It is much more common these days to have an office job than it was just a few generations back. In humans, unfortunately, we have seen a quite dramatic increase in obesity in the last decades. And an even more serious effect is that the prevalence of diabetes also has increased dramatically, as I'm sure most of you are already aware of. If you take a look at the orange dots in this picture, we see the proportion of diabetics in the year 1980, so around 40 years ago. And if we then take a look at the larger red dots, we see the number of people suffering from diabetes in the year 2014. So it's been quite a dramatic increase. For example, in the middle of the map, you will see the Middle East, where numbers have risen from around 6% to 14%, which is more than double. And there are studies estimating that in the year 2035, there will be around 500 million people suffering from diabetes worldwide. And most of these people, they do suffer from type 2 diabetes. Our theory was that the lifestyle changes that we put our cats through would also lead to an increase in obesity and diabetes. And this was our hypothesis that we wanted to prove with the research. And the aim of my research was to try and figure out which factors in the cat itself and also in the cat's environment that could potentially have a risk of increasing the risk of the cat developing diabetes. So we wanted to confirm some previously identified risk factors for diabetes in cats, and we also wanted to identify new risk factors for diabetes. So in my first study, we wanted to find out just how common diabetes is in Sweden, because this was at the time not known. There are a few reports from other countries, but no larger studies had ever been performed here in Sweden. This study was performed in collaboration with Agria Pet Insurance. As researchers at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, we were allowed access to parts of the huge database at Agria, of course without names and other personal information. And in this database, there are more than 500,000 cats registered, which in these circumstances is a huge dataset, which gives us a very good material to do high quality research on. So we are quite fortunate as researchers. And we investigated all cats in this database during a 5-year period. So we started investigating if diabetes was more common in certain cat breeds than others. And we found some quite large differences between breeds. If we start looking in the middle of the picture, the orange square marks the average of all cats in the database. So this bar can be used as a reference when comparing with other breeds. If you then have a look at the left, you will see 4 breeds marked in red. These 4 breeds all have an increased risk of developing diabetes. And the breeds are the Burmese and the Russian blue cats, with a 4-fold risk compared to other cats, and the Norwegian forest cat and the Abyssinian with a double risk. On the other hand, if you look to the right in the diagram, there are a number of breeds with a lower risk of diabetes, marked in green. And breeds with a lower risk include the Persian cat, the British Shorthair, Burman, Ragdolls, Siberian cats, and the Bengal cat. We could also see that diabetes is a disease of the older cat. The highest risk age for developing diabetes was between 11 and 16 years of age. Of course, there will also be many younger cats than this with diabetes because there are also more cats available in this age range. But the risk of developing diabetes is as highest in the older ages of the cats. So the conclusions we draw from this study was that we could confirm the Burmese cat breed to be a high-risk breed for diabetes, also here in Sweden. This had been seen already in some other countries like England and Australia. We also identified 3 new risk breeds for the disease. And this information was new, and the only reason that we were able to detect this was thanks to the very large size of this database used for the study. We also saw that male cats were more commonly affected with diabetes, and that cats were mainly middle-aged to older. So all these risk factors that we have managed to identify in this study are what we call non-modifiable ones. That means that we as vets or you as an owner, we can't change them. The cat will always be of a certain breed and sex, and they will hopefully age. So all this is important background information for both vets and owners, but we also wanted to investigate other factors that we might influence. And this led us to the next study, where we investigated some more modifiable risk factors for diabetes in cats. So what we did was that we also in this study included all the cats with diabetes that we found in study 1, and we also included a group of cats that we knew did not have diabetes to compare with, the control group. And again, with the help of Agria, we sent letters to all owners asking them to participate in a questionnaire that was available online. In this questionnaire, the owners answered many questions relating to the cat and its environment, such as food, activity levels, and so on. And we have data from around 400 cats with diabetes, and in total, a little more than 2,000 cats, so also quite a large data set. In the questionnaire, we asked the owner of the cat how they would estimate their cat's body condition with the help of these illustrations of an underweight and a normal weight and overweight cats. What we could see very clearly in this study was that being overweight, as estimated by the owners, was a very important risk factor for diabetes. If the owner said that the cat had been overweight, the risk of developing diabetes was clearly increased. It didn't matter what kind of diet the cats ate, being overweight was a risk factor regardless of diet. And the same association is shown in humans as well. If we, on the other hand, turn these numbers around and have a look at the effect of the diet within the different body condition groups of the cats, we did notice something very interesting. We saw an association that was not as strong as the association between being overweight and the diabetes risk that we discussed previously. But we saw in cats that was judged by their owners to be of normal weight, we saw an association between eating mainly a dry food diet and an increased risk of diabetes. This was a very new finding, and we strongly believe that this needs to be confirmed with more research before we can draw any firm conclusions from this interesting association. We're not sure today if it is a true association and also not how strong it is, so more research is necessary. So in this study, we could confirm a clear association between overweight and an increased risk of diabetes. We also saw that indoor cats more often develop diabetes. And when you compare indoor versus outdoor cats, the types of diseases and injuries that they can sustain will of course be very different. If you, for example, would have looked at traffic accidents, the picture would be very different. But in this case, it's very likely that the inactivity of an indoor cat will contribute to an increased risk of diabetes. Also, in cats being described by their owners as being a greedy eater, we could also see an association with developing diabetes. And finally, we saw this association between eating mainly dry food and diabetes, but only in the group of normal weight cats. And this needs more research, so I put a question mark on this finding for now on. So these are all examples of more or less modifiable risk factors, things that we may be able to do something about. So the conclusions that we could draw from both our studies that were performed together with Agria Insurance was that cats and humans share many of the most important risk factors for diabetes. It seems that overweight is the most important risk factors in both cats and people. We could also see that inactivity, seen with indoors cats, was associated with an increased risk, and this is true also for us humans. Increasing age is a risk factor for both cats and people. And we also believe that genetics is very important in cats. We know this for sure in people. You need to have a certain set of genes to be able to even develop diabetes, and the fact that it was more common in certain breeds makes us pretty sure that there are predisposing genes also inherited in these cat breeds. And the genetic background also explains why not all overweight cats and people develop diabetes, because they don't. So you need the genetic predisposition for the disease. And finally, the association with carbohydrates and diabetes in cats, we do think it needs more research. In people, there are several studies showing an association between eating a lot of sugar, as in sugary beverage, for example, soda, and developing diabetes. Some other interesting facts is that type 2 diabetes, which is by far the most common type of diabetes in both cats and humans, actually does not seem to exist to a larger extent in other animals, such as dogs or horses. And cats and people, they also show a very similar clinical picture with a connection to the so-called insulin resistant, which is present in both diabetic people and in diabetic cats. So research done in cats or in people can be beneficial for both. So to sum up, what does the typical diabetic cat look like? Well, first on the list, they are most often overweight. And male cats are for some reason predisposed, we don't know why, as are neutered cats. Indoors, inactive cats are overrepresented, and middle-aged to older cats are the most commonly patients we see. We have also learned that some breeds, such as the Burmese, Russian Blue, Norwegian Forest Cat, and Abyssinian, are overrepresented. So this leads us on to how will I as a cat owner know if my cat would develop diabetes? What are the clinical signs? Well, the first thing that the owner usually will notice is that the cat will start drinking and peeing more. Early on, the cat's appetite is usually increased, but despite eating more food than normal, the cat will start losing weight. And this happens because the diabetic cat cannot make use of its blood sugar, and instead the sugar will leave the cat via the urine. And this leads to the cat losing a lot of energy, and therefore they will try to compensate by eating more, but they will still lose weight. So what do I do as an owner suspecting my cat to have diabetes? Well, this is a disease that requires a visit to your veterinarian. The vet will typically examine the cat and start by taking a blood sample. It's very important that the vet does not only measure the blood glucose, which of course will be high, but that he or she also confirms the diagnosis with the so-called long-time glucose memory, the fructosamine, to verify the diagnosis. And the reason for this is that a cat that is stressed can get very, very high blood glucose values, and this does not mean that they have diabetes. And many cats will be stressed out by the travel to the vet, by the dog maybe barking in the waiting room, by a scary vet in a white coat and being held for taking a blood sample, etc. The vet may also want to run more tests and maybe take a urine sample to rule out other diseases that can be common in an older cat patient. When a diagnosis of diabetes has been confirmed, it's important to start the treatment as soon as possible. The first thing to do is to try and cut out as many carbohydrates as possible. And as we discussed earlier, carbs will be found in, for example, grains and rice, and also in dry food. So an easy way to do this is to try and stay away from the dry food for the diabetic cat, and instead switch to a wet diet if possible. Because carbs will be digested into sugar in the cat's body, and a diabetic cat cannot process the sugar, so it's advisable to try to avoid it fully. In most cases, insulin treatment is also necessary. Insulin is given as an injection twice daily, and usually the cat won't even notice the needle because it's very thin. It's also important to keep the cat in a perfect body condition, because some cats will need to lose weight because they will still be overweight at the time of diagnosis, while others may have become underweight and they then need to gain weight. The veterinary clinic can be of good help with the weight management. And finally, to increase the chance of a successful treatment, it's valuable to learn how to do home glucose blood monitoring as an owner. And this can also be taught at the vets. The prognosis for the diabetic cat is in many cases good. How good the prognosis gets, it depends on many things. Sometimes we have other diseases like chronic kidney disease that's common in an older cat patient that can complicate the treatment. And many cats can achieve what we call remission. And remission means that the cat no longer needs its daily insulin shots. The cat will always be classified as a diabetic, but without medication if in remission. It's strongly recommended that the low-carb diet is maintained for the rest of the cat's life to avoid the risk of the diabetes coming back. It's also important to keep an eye on the cat's body condition for the same reason. And even if remission is not always achieved, there are many good examples with diabetic cats being successfully treated for many, many years. So diabetes in a cat is definitely not a death sentence, but it is a demanding disease, especially for the cat owner, but also to some extent for the cat itself. If you're interested in the topic, feline diabetes mellitus, and want to learn much more on the topic, my thesis is available through the SLU website, and it can be reached through the library. Thank you all so much for listening to my presentation. I've talked about parts of my PhD project in feline diabetes that was done in collaboration with Agria Pet Insurance and the Swedish Kennel Club Research Foundation. And the images on this slide are from other interesting parts of my research project. I would also like to thank all cats and their owners participating in my studies. Without you, there would not be a project. Thank you very much. Thank you.